One of the greatest things that we could ever do, the most courageous things that we could ever do, is to be inclusive. As a society, as a nation, and as individuals. Organizations, too, have the capacity to be courageous. However, most are not. Most organizations look at inclusion as a problem to be solved in order to get on to bigger and better things. It's almost like they have a checklist. Let's see. We have an Asian in sales, a Muslim in marketing. We've got that guy in a wheelchair down in customer service, and Lisa. Obviously, she's a woman, but she's also black and a lesbian. 3 check marks. We are a diverse and inclusive organization. Are you? Diversity and inclusion is more than your workforce composition. An inclusive organization means you have a diverse cross-sector of individuals who actually work together. They interact throughout the day. If your organization has diverse faces but lacks diverse voices, you do not get to call yourself diverse and inclusive. So that brings us to my big idea. I believe that growth and great works begin with inclusion. And in order to do that, you have to be a courageous organization. I think Verna Myers says it very well when she speaks about the difference between diversity and inclusion. So courageous companies are companies that go beyond just tolerating one another. When you think about a company like AT&T, 2002, their CEO, Randall Stevenson, stood up at their annual conference in front of all of his employees, and he said, "Tolerance is for cowards." We have to go beyond tolerating one another to an uncomfortable place and understand one another. At that moment in time, AT&T was listed as number 9 on Diversity Inc.'s most diverse companies out of the top 50 in the country. Currently, they are number 3. So obviously, in doing that, something clicked and they're doing better. Or you could be courageous like a company like Accenture. They have lofty goals in terms of inclusion and diversity. So much so that they went out and did a study and did a video. This program is fascinating, and it's called Inclusion Starts with I. And they did this program where they videotaped their employees, and they asked them this question: what does exclusion feel like to you? What does exclusion look like to you? And from that conversation, they generated a program where they were able to go back to their management staff and implement programming to make it a more positive and inclusive work environment. They wanted their employees to be themselves and be free to do their work. They are listed as number 14 on that very same list. So when we think about this big idea, growth and great works beginning with inclusion, we have to really peel it apart. And today I'm going to give you a blueprint on how to do that in little bite-sized steps. When I was growing up in Chicago, I'm the oldest of 4 and the only male. For a black male in Chicago at that time, it was a very challenging time. The statistics said that by 25, you'd be dead or in jail. And my mother worked diligently hard to make sure we had every opportunity for school and a good, decent place to live, and sometimes she worked 2 jobs. 2 of those jobs stand out to me even today, and one is because I was a kid and I thought it was the mecca of cool jobs. It was Toys R Us. But that's not the one that impacted me the most. The one that had the greatest impact, she worked with teens at the YMCA. And I spent a lot of hours after school there learning about leadership, responsibility, community. So a few years ago, my family, we packed up and moved to a new community and were looking to belong. We were looking to get involved, and we decided to join the YMCA, a place that I was very familiar with. And to my surprise, there wasn't a teen leadership program there. So my wife and I are people who we believe if you complain, you ought to do something. So I volunteered to lead the program. Through a series of conversations with 5 different executives, from the branch manager through the CEO in 3 different states, I got a book that looks like one of your college textbooks, marked up, written, highlighted, numbers, notes, pages out of order. Suffice to say, that program never got off the ground. So rather than quit, I took the next step and I joined the board. And I said, a bigger seat, a bigger platform, a bigger opportunity to serve. And I've been on several boards. So a little background: at this time, I had already gone through a place where I had been a youth pastor and a young adult minister. I had operated and run a nonprofit for youth. I had worked with kids doing curriculum and facilitating. So I felt more than qualified for this role at the YMCA, working with this exact population. I resigned from that position 2 weeks ago. I served on that board and was asked to fundraise and was asked to go out and do the work of the YMCA, but was never allowed a voice in how it should run and make it better. I didn't feel my time was respected, and I didn't feel as though I was heard. When new people come to your organization, how do they feel? Do they feel like they belong, or do they feel like I did? Uncomfortable, isolated, excluded. This idea of inclusion will allow us to fulfill the 3 deepest needs of human. When you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right after personal and safety is belonging. Think of all the things that you belong to: gymnasiums, churches, social media sites, dating sites, Netflix. Think of all the things you identify with: race, where you're from, where you live, types of cars you drive, Coke or Pepsi, Apple or Android. Those things are all about belonging. Belonging is hardwired in our brain. We are genetically predispositioned to want to belong. And we have to have that opportunity and give that opportunity to our employees. When I became a youth pastor, like many, many youth pastors before me, I had some gigantic ideas how I was going to save the church. You heard me right. I didn't say my church, I said the church. I was going to make a difference. And then I found out that youth were leaving the church in alarming numbers. So why? I had to get to the bottom of that. And once I did, I found out that they didn't belong. They didn't have a place where they felt like they belonged. So the first thing we had to do was figure out how to make that work. How do you get these young people to belong? In this church, we had people who were from 11 to 19. So we had old kids, what we called, and young kids, and they didn't like each other. I know, it's shocking that it's not all kumbaya in youth group. But it's true, they didn't. Old kids thought the young kids were babies. Young kids thought the big kids were bullied. They were all just kind of dropped off where the parents went to the big church for an hour, and we had to start at the beginning. So we did potlucks, and we did games, and we did outings, and we went to sporting events. We did all these things just because we needed them to belong. And when we got to a place where they started to belong, then we could move to the next stage, but not before. You see, belong is the buy-in stage, and it's important to get buy-in if you're going to talk about inclusion with people. After that point of belonging, we could move on to the next point. And a lot of companies want to skip the next point, the first point, and go to the next point, because the second is believe. Believe is actually the prove it stage, but it usually looks like this. We are a great company. We are rapidly expanding. We're growing. We are doing some amazing work. You should join us. You belong with us. Come. We're going to pay you a lot of money. Which I understand is a much easier conversation than we are really struggling to attract diverse talent and people from diverse backgrounds. So we really need you. Could you join us? It's like a blind date. Think of a blind date that goes, I'm awesome, I'm super, I'm cool, I'm good looking, I got a nice car, you should date me, and I've got a lot of money, so I'm going to spend that on you. Probably not a lot of second dates. And if there are a few dates at some point, you just kind of get tired of that act. because you're not heard, you're not valued, you're not respected. So the believe stage is vitally important for companies to understand they need to make sure that the people buy into what they're doing, and you can't have one before the others. What I've learned is you cannot catch a fish after you've cleaned it. It just doesn't work in that order. You must first catch it and then clean it. And it's the same with people who come to your organization. So after believe, the final step in that process is to begin. Begin's a tough one because in between there's a little sweet spot where I had to lose control of that youth group. I had to allow them to do the work. I had to say, hey, here's my vision, but I can't make it happen. You have to. And it's kind of cool because I understand something now that I didn't then. I've never seen a gardener tell a flower how to grow. You cannot have growth and control. So before we got to the next step, I thought about something in my life that I'd like to correct here on stage with you. I had a friend named Earl when I was in college. And Earl played basketball. He was the captain of our school's basketball team. I love basketball. I still play 2-3 days a week when I can. And Earl and I were good friends, but we never played basketball together. You're thinking, how could that be? Well, in order for me to play basketball with Earl, I would have had to give up control. I probably should mention that Earl was captain of the wheelchair basketball team. For me to play with Earl, I would have had to lose the privilege of walking. I would have had to sit in his chair and see things from his perspective. I would have had to give up control. And I wasn't ready then, but I am now. So, Earl, if you're watching, if any of you know Earl, please let him know that I'm be glad to play with him and I want to include him. So the last step in that process, the last stage is begin. Begin is when people make a conscious decision to engage. So if I go back to that youth group, there came a point after we went through the process where they actually created all the logos for the church. They became the photographers for all the church events. They became the videographers for the church event. We held our first youth conference, and so on and so on. They brought in other youth to grow that ministry. And that's how the ministry grew. I empowered them, but they grew it. And it has to be the same for organizations. We have to be willing to let go a little control and empower people to do the work. Belong, believe, begin. It's a very simple process, and we have to follow it to get there. Here's the meat of the message. This is what gets uncomfortable for people because it is a direct challenge for leaders to be courageous, for organizations to be courageous. Inclusion will make you money. A lot of times that's the bottom line. So let's just get to that because it leads to higher productivity. People want to be engaged. People want to contribute. People want to belong. It will also lead to higher morale. It will also lead to more innovation, better recruitment, better engagement, better in retention. So now that that argument is done, let's look at some of the other arguments that if you include others, you lose privileges and you lose power. You don't lose privilege when you include others. You gain valuable insight and valuable perspective. And you absolutely do not lose power. You actually allow others to assume their power, others to walk into their natural power, others to reach their full potential. You must not be threatened by employees who are becoming powerful because their power does not diminish your power. They are complementary. And the onus cannot be just on organization. It has to also be on us. We have to know that even though they aspire to be these companies that are inclusive, they are not yet there. And it is our responsibility to no longer sit in the corner, but to ask to dance. We have to raise our hand, and our mantra must be, include me. When you're making these decisions, include me. And for the leaders, when they come to you and they say, include me, be courageous, ask their perspectives, ask about their knowledge, see things from their viewpoint, allow them to be their authentic selves. And if you can manage these stages, belong, believe, begin, you will see your organization transform, and you will reach a nirvana that is a fourth and final stage that is simply be. Your people will be their authentic selves, and you can grow and do great works. That is my big idea. Thank you for listening.